so as I just mentioned, I'm starting the recording of this session. And if you don't want to be in the recording, go ahead and turn off your video and/or audio and submit your feedback in text chat directly to me or another co-host. And with that, thank you, Rebecca, for joining us. We deeply appreciate it. We would love to see your presentation.
Great. Thank you for having me today. Let me pull up my presentation. Slideshow. So, hi, I'm Rebecca Saltzman. I'm the president of the BART Board. I've been serving on the board for about 10 years now and work on a lot of different things at BART, but one of the issues I've worked most on is transit-oriented development and really moving forward our program to bring more housing and particularly affordable housing to BART stations throughout the Bay Area. So a little bit about BART. I'm guessing you've all ridden on BART, but just to give you a little bit more context, BART is actually this year celebrating our 50th anniversary. And over those 50 years, we've been incredibly important to how the Bay Area has grown. We now connect 5 of the 9 counties, originally started out in 3 of the counties in the Bay Area, now go to 5, and we have 50 stations that cover 131 miles. So it goes pretty far. Pre-COVID, we were completely packed at about 420,000 riders per day. Obviously, that changed during COVID. At the beginning, we went down to 6% of regular ridership. It's come back up since then. Now we're on weekdays a little over 35%, and on weekends more like 50 or 60%. But that's kind of a key reason, even though we started our TOD program before COVID, it makes our program even more important to bring more riders living right next to BART so that they're using BART for other things besides just getting to work, because so many people in the Bay Area now only are going into their offices 1, 2, 3 days a week. So we need to find ways for people to use transit for other trips as well. And we're just one part of the transit network in the Bay Area. We have a lot of agencies here, 27. So that has additional impacts on how we serve people and how our housing serves folks who live there. So why are we doing this? We get asked this a lot at BART, like, you guys are supposed to be focused on transit. Why are you doing all this work on housing? Well, we're doing it, one, because it's really important to BART and to making BART successful, but it's also really important to having an impact on climate change and on equity in the Bay Area. So there have been many studies done, and these are just some stats to share. One study showed that TOD residents take BART for daily needs from 35 to 85% more often than people living further away. So that's a really big increase. Another study has shown that 50% reduction in driving when lower income households live within a quarter mile of frequent transit. So that's very significant, especially when you consider that 41% of all greenhouse gas emissions in California are from the transportation sector. We also find that TOD residents are nearly twice as likely to commute to work on BART than non-TOD residents. Obviously, this is with pre-COVID data. We'll see how that changes over time as work changes. And then, of course, people living in BART TODs are generating fewer greenhouse gas emissions than the regional average. So we're also really important in terms of the Bay Area's plans for sustainable growth. So in the Metropolitan Transportation Commission plans for priority development areas looking towards 2050, you can see them in blue on the map on the left. And then you can see the BART stations on the right, at least where BART serves. You can see that all those blue zones are pretty much centered exactly around BART stations. So building at BART stations is incredibly important to fulfill the region's vision, both for housing, but also for kind of overall land use and the environment moving forward into the next few decades. Now, coming back a little closer to my home, I live in El Cerrito, and we're a small city, about 26,000 people, but we're growing and we embrace growth here, which one of the reasons I'm was happy to move here a few years ago. And we have 2 BART stations, which is pretty incredible for a city of our size. But my home station is El Cerrito Plaza, and this is a photo from the platform of one of the parking lots. There are several parking lots. And you can see this was taken, I don't know, sometime in the past year. Since COVID, these lots are definitely not filling up. So we kind of have these empty parking lots in a pretty busy part of our city, in the area where we want to create a future downtown, and it's filled with parking right now. So we want to change that. So these are the initial conceptual plans for what is going to be built at the BART station. So all those taller buildings there right around the BART tracks, those are all BART land that right now are all filled with parking lots. And so we're hoping to have about 800 new housing units there, as well as a brand new public library, which El Cerrito really needs. We have a lovely library that's tiny and has like no community space, so can maybe get at most 20 people in there for a community event. So that's something that the city really needs, and it's exciting. BART is going to be able to work with the city on that. It's also going to create a lot more open space, which we're very lucky in El Cerrito to have a lot of parks, but around this area there's not a lot right there. So it's really going to open up this space, and it's gonna, as I was mentioning, there's this goal to kind of create more of a downtown feel. There's a lot of shopping right across the street from the BART station. So if you see the street that's over on the left, Fairmount, right to the other side of it on the across the street is a huge shopping complex, but it's very car oriented. And even though all the stores have doors on the street side, they're all locked on the street side. They only open to the parking lot. So at some point it was planned, and maybe decades ago they were open on the street side, but they're not any longer. So we think by activating this side of the street, we can activate the other side of the street, really make it more welcoming to bicyclists and pedestrians and people taking transit, and make it a hub of the city. So things like this are why I'm, personally very excited, bringing the housing there, but also just improving the city, which I think these BART developments do very well. And half of the units at the station are going to be below market rate, with 37% of them being affordable units, some deeply affordable, and 15% of them being for kind of the missing middle housing, which El Cerrito really needs. So going broader again, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about the history of BART's transit-oriented development program. It's little known, but the first development we built was in Castro Valley in 1993. It's a very suburban car-oriented area, so I think it's not top of mind when people think of developments at BART stations, but that was the first one. And then years later, BART adopted its first TOD policy. So I think it was sort of just happening as cities and developers came to BART, and then they passed their first policy in 2005. And probably the most important part of that policy was that they got rid of the requirement that had been previously required at BART to replace every single parking space. That if you were going to build anything in a parking lot, you had to replace every single parking space. So that went away in 2005, and we've been going even further since then. I got elected to the board in 2012, and in 2016, we updated our TOD policy, really thinking about what was happening at the time, and getting a lot more ambitious about our goals, which I'll talk about on the next slide. And then in the last couple of years, we've done more. One of the most significant things was a couple of years ago, we passed a land discount for affordable housing, and it's kind of scaled in a way where the more affordable units a developer provides and the deeper level of affordability, they get more of a land discount, knowing that it's just very difficult for an affordable development to pay market rate for BART land, knowing that we have a huge amount of public land and we want to make this available so we can have a more affordable housing. So a little bit more about our 2016 policy update. We did two things at once. We adopted a new TOD policy and a new station access policy. And we adopted performance targets along with these. So our goal is to build 20,000 new housing units on BART land by 2040, with at least 7,000 of those, or 35%, being affordable. And we want to really increase the active access mode share, being walking and biking, to our stations. So with this new station access policy, you can see on the right our prioritization. We're prioritizing pedestrians at the top, then people on bicycles, then transit and shuttles. And then at the bottom, you get to drop off and pick up, and finally parking. We want fewer people to have to drive and park at our stations than they do today. And so you can see here both historical numbers and then our targets for 2025. There was also already a big improvement from 2008 to 2015. It used to be that 34% of BART riders drove and parked. It changed to 27% in 2015, and a lot of that shift had to do with active access increasing, so biking and walking. And then we set these 2025 goals, not knowing about the pandemic. I actually think with the pandemic, we're likely to far exceed these goals, because we've seen, based on initial data from other surveys we do, which aren't quite precise as this data is, that more and more people are biking and walking, especially. Transit hasn't really gone up, transit access to our stations, but biking and walking has significantly. And we didn't just set a policy, we're actively working with cities to improve pedestrian and bicycle access to our stations. So BART got funding to do a walk bike network gap study, because what we find is there's some good facilities around our stations, but then there's lots of holes in how to actually get to the station from your home or your job. And so you can see the map on the right is just one example of this. But we did this at our stations throughout the Bay Area and shared this with cities and are working with them. We also have invested a significant amount of funds into enhancement in our station areas. So especially some of the parking lots are hostile towards bicyclists and pedestrians. They were made for cars. They really weren't made for getting through them any other way. So we are doing a lot of work to improve those. So once you get to the station, it's safe to get through the station area and park your bike or walk through. And then we launched a brand new program last year. It's our first grant program ever. It's the Safe Routes to Transit program. And we are giving grants to cities to improve bicycle and pedestrian access. So we're, part of the funding that they can get to improve that access. And it's a very competitive program. We just awarded our first round of grants, and I'm sure we will continue to have interest from cities to do that. And this is a little bit about kind of BART's overall TOD portfolio. We have a lot of land. We're one of the largest public landowners in the Bay Area, with 250 acres of land at 27 stations within 22 different jurisdictions. So it's quite complicated, because it's not just BART that makes the decisions. It has to be along with the cities or counties. We think that we could build up to 20,000 homes at our stations and 4.5 million square feet of commercial space at our stations. So this would be a really big change in advance for the Bay Area if we can fulfill all of this. And you might have heard about a bill that passed a few years ago, AB 2923, by then Assembly Member David Chu. And it was a really transformative bill. BART did not run this bill, but Assemblymember Chu got a lot of the language from BART's aspirational goals that BART had been sharing with developers and cities about what we wanted to see at our stations. And essentially AB 2923 codified this and said, these are no longer goals, you must do this. And so we've been working with cities over the past few years, and actually this summer it really goes into effect, is when all the zoning at all the cities got updated. Either they updated them on their own, or if they hadn't done that by the end of June, it automatically got updated to meet these standards that you can see on the slide. You might have heard most about the conversation around height limits. So it instituted the minimum height limits for these parcels. You can kind of see the green dots on the map on the right are the neighborhood town centers, the more kind of suburban car-oriented areas. They must allow at least 5 stories. For the yellow dots, which are urban neighborhood city centers, they have to allow at least 7 stories. And those are places, you know, not in the densest areas, but a little more dense, more transit, more bike walk access. And then the regional center, which is really only applicable to Oakland because our San Francisco stations don't have developable land. They're requiring at least 12 stories. But that gets talked about a lot. What doesn't get talked about as much is the requirements around parking. So AB 2923 set maximums for vehicle parking for both residential and office usage. And this has made maybe the biggest impact even more than the height requirements. So if you look at a big chart that actually the BART board is going to be approving tomorrow, the biggest changes where the cities weren't already kind of up to code with AB 2923 were on the parking. So that will have a really big impact because parking is extremely expensive to build. It's about $80,000 per space. And so building more parking means fewer units, fewer affordable units, less public space, less amenities. So this will make a big difference. So getting into a little bit about specific developments at BART, I'm going to just show a few examples. Probably one of the best known developments, because it's been around for a long time, is Fruitvale BART. You can see the before picture on the left. It was a street, it was parking. You can see there's people walking and biking, but it's not that great of an experience. And on the right is what we have today. It's a much better public space where they can do community events, and it's very pleasant to walk through. There are lots of stores. There's a public library there. And of course, there's housing. And this was the first part of the development, not pictured here. In the past couple of years, 2 new developments have also been built at Fruitvale BART, building out the rest of the parking space there, which were completely affordable developments. So it's grown since this initial development. So if you haven't been there in a while, check it out, either stop by or even just going by on BART, you can see it pretty well. And then Pleasant Hill Contra Costa Center was one of our early developments as well. This is what the station area used to look like, a big, massive crater of parking, which many of our stations are or were. And this is what it looked like as of a couple of years ago. You can see the development has taken up quite a bit of the space already. And you see Block C and Block D there are empty, but those are actually now under construction. So the whole area will be built out. So that's brought a lot of housing units, but also a lot of retail. And this was a place where the retail at the beginning of the development struggled a little bit, but then once some businesses were able to prove that they could be successful, it's been hugely successful there. And then even more importantly with this station, before it was just these parking lots, which you can see on the bottom right here, just to remind you. And now it's this beautiful, walkable community space. It's a pleasant place to be. They have a farmer's market there. They have off-the-grid food trucks there every week. And it's kind of become a center of the community. So this is what these developments can be, more than just housing. And then looking towards the future, we have some really exciting projects coming up. The couple pictured here are both in Oakland. So at the top right, you can see the plans for Lake Merritt BART, which is going to be a mixed-use development of both housing, market rate, and affordable, and a big office building. Construction is actually going to start on the first affordable building, the one that says 97 units senior affordable. They're hoping to break ground later this year. So that's very exciting to see that moving forward. And then on the left, you can see West Oakland BART. West Oakland, it's really interesting because it's just one stop away from San Francisco. It's just on the other side of the Transbay Tube. And so it's a really big opportunity to build housing there and also to build office space, which with the environment right now is probably going to take a longer time, the office piece of it. But as demand for office returns and as it changes, as big businesses maybe decide they don't want to have just one office space in San Francisco or Silicon Valley, but they want to be a little bit spread out, places like West Oakland would be good places for them to have kind of satellite offices. So we're excited about that moving forward. And then the picture on the right is just showing a lot of our developments recently and moving forward are going to be modular. And so that's speeding up the construction process a lot. One I was involved with was at San Leandro BART, which is completely modular and 100% affordable. And it just went up so much more quickly. And you look at it today and you cannot tell at all that it was modular. There's no way anybody would be able to tell. And the units are lovely. They're just, I think they're just as nice as some of the market rate housing being built now. So it's a great thing that construction is changing. We can make it quicker and cheaper and get more housing built. And then I wanted to end talking a little bit about Berkeley, which I represent. We've been working for the past 4.5 years on planning to build at North Berkeley and Ashby BART. I represent North Berkeley, and my colleague on the BART board, Latifa Simon, represents Ashby. North Berkeley has been quite a fight going forward and very animated, which I'll talk about, but Ashby as well. This is just a photo I took a few weeks ago at North Berkeley. This is just one of the many parking lots there. You can see it's a sea of parking in an otherwise lovely area with lots of trees. Everything around the parking lot is very nice, but you get to the parking lot and it's really takes away from the community. I'm there quite often because my mother-in-law lives in walking distance of the station. And every time I'm there, I just, dream of what we will be able to do there in the future. So talking about what we're doing in the future, we've had a lot of discussions over the past 4.5 years. We've had countless city council meetings, town halls, BART board meetings, planning commission meetings. The city set up a community advisory group that met 8 times. We've had outreach at the BART stations. We've been just about everywhere. And I'm guessing by now thousands of Berkeley residents have weighed in on the North Berkeley and Ashby projects. And you can see from these photos that opinions ran the spectrum, especially early on in the process. There were a lot of folks in the North Berkeley area, or I should say a lot of very vocal folks in the North Berkeley area who were trying to fight for 4-story maximum building with 2 stories at the perimeters. But there were just as many, or I think as it evolved over the 4.5 years, more people saying they wanted as many homes as possible. So you see some of the signs, I want more neighbors in North Berkeley BART, or yes, more homes, less parking. And then you can see on the left at the top, that was at a BART board meeting a few years ago when advocates unveiled their petition for more homes at Ashby BART. So through this whole community process, we're finally going to get to having projects there. And these images, they're not even really designs, they're preliminary concepts because we don't have developers at either sites yet. But just in June, the Berkeley City Council unanimously adopted zoning, which was a pretty amazing feat. It took a lot of work to get to. And we're looking towards having 700 to 1,200 housing units per station, with a minimum of 35% of them being affordable. But really the goal is to try to reach more towards 50%. And the city made a historic allocation of $53 million for affordable housing, specifically at Ashby and North Berkeley BART, so we can leverage those funds to be competitive for other funds that require a local match. And we're significantly reducing the parking there, acknowledging that the housing is needed more, and that both Ashby and North Berkeley have very good access right now for biking, walking, and transit at Ashby, less so at North Berkeley, but that we're also going to work to do a lot more to improve access to ensure that people can continue to get to these stations. But these are the, biggest projects that Berkeley has planned. It was very important to them. And so the mayor, Jesse Arreguín, as well as the council members were really invested in moving this forward along with the BART board. So that is my presentation. I'll stop sharing now. Happy to take any questions and be part of any discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rebecca. This is great. I think Elizabeth's question in the chat, I think she should go first, please.
To reiterate it out loud. So Rebecca, just wondering, is there any visioning being done for the Rockridge BART station? I think that one always stood out to me because I also went to school in Berkeley, lived in both Berkeley and Oakland, and that is one of the highest resource areas in the entire Bay Area, and really just in my mind needs more housing there. So just wondering what the plans are.
Yes, that's actually the next station we're planning. So we've had some initial meetings with the city council member there, Dan Kolb, and with city staff, and we've started to do some kind of quiet meetings with the community groups, but we're doing a public town hall later this year to sort of introduce the concept and ask people, what they're interested in. And we're hoping to have a much shorter planning process than in Berkeley, and the city agrees with that. They want it to be shorter, quicker, and get the housing there faster. It is, though, people get really excited about Rockridge because it's kind of symbolic, because there hasn't been development there. It's a very affluent community, but it isn't the same opportunity as some of the other sites. So we're looking at maybe at the most 200 units there, because most of the parking is right underneath the BART tracks and a state highway. So it's actually Caltrans property. Very little of it actually is BART property. So it's kind of this funny triangle shaped segment. So we still want to do it. We'll be under AB 2923 and it's zoned for 7 stories. But even with that, it's not going to be a lot of units, but I think it could be very helpful to the community. I guess for Rockridge, that is a lot of units, but in the scheme of things, it's not as big. It's not as much housing.
Great. And I have a question, and then after that, let's go to David. So as a reintroduction, I'm Graham Freeman. I'm one of the co-leads at Santa Cruz YIMBY. My day job is in information security and solar energy software. And I live here in Santa Cruz and would love to have more neighbors, especially neighbors riding bikes. So my question is, Rebecca, as you've gone through this process and everything related to your public service on BART in particular, who have been the most helpful community participants in getting these things done? Not necessarily other electeds, but just people in the community who want to put some time into it, who have day jobs, who have kids, who don't have a lot of time, don't necessarily have in-depth knowledge of all the issues, but still want to help. Can you paint a picture of how to be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly people like you. So I can tell you when we first started talking about North Berkeley, which actually did come from an elected, the then council member, Linda Mayo, approached me and Mayor Arreguín and said, let's start talking about maybe doing housing in North Berkeley. And this was before we had the state law change. So it was going to be kind of an uphill battle there. But we actually me and the council member and a bunch of volunteers went out and went door to door in North Berkeley and just started chatting with people about it and having conversations. And then we did a really big town hall with over 300 people there. But out of that, people started to see that this was a real possibility. So you had some people that then got pretty frightened about it, started having meetings in their homes talking about it. And you had people getting really excited about it, also having meetings in their homes. So I went to a lot of homes, meetings with, 5 to 25 people, on various sides of it, just folks, regular residents engaging. That is a highly engaged community. So there was a lot of that. It's probably a little bit less so, in El Cerrito, it's really there's one group on one side and one group on another side because we're a smaller city. But yeah, it's been regular people. Sometimes it's people who have some more knowledge or interest who kind of either work in planning or development or are environmental advocates, but sometimes it's people that it has nothing to do with their regular work expertise, and they care. Either, especially in North Berkeley, I saw a lot of middle-aged folks realizing that their kids weren't going to be able to afford to live in Berkeley. They were never going to be able to afford to live there, and they had to do something about it, or that wouldn't change for their kids or grandkids or anybody who came after. So that was, I think, a new thing we're starting to see. People before this just wouldn't have been at the top of their list, realizing it impacts them. So yeah, I think it runs the gamut, but I think pretty much anybody can do it. It's a matter of getting people together and getting your messaging about what the community wants and needs, and then working with the elected officials to get it.
Wonderful, thank you. Maybe, so one takeaway I have from that, and curious to know to what extent you agree, is don't be intimidated and just participate.
Absolutely. I mean, that's easier said than done.
Sure,
I came to BART Board as an advocate, and I did a lot of advocacy on transit and housing just in my free time. And I remember those first community meetings I went to. I actually lived adjacent to Rockridge. And so I remember some of my first meetings I went to as an advocate around development issues, and it was about redeveloping the Safeway in Rockridge. And I was maybe one of 5 people okay with doing it in a room of 500.
right.
And I got booed, and it was like one of my first times doing public speaking at local meetings. So you can say, don't be intimidated, but it can be scary. And so I would say, even if you're intimidated, do it. It's worth it. And Rockridge has changed since then. Now their, community council there is like half their board is YIMBYs. So it's changed. I mean, but you have to be part of creating that change, and it can be intimidating. So find your people to support you. So even when it's intimidating or scary or disheartening, you have your people to go to that will support you.
Great, thanks. So the next question chronologically is David Van Brink's question in the chat. David, if you'd like to go, if you could start with like a 5 to 10 second introduction. And then after you, David, I'd like for Lonnie to go since she has her hand raised.
Great. Yeah, hello, I'm David. I live in Santa Cruz, and I'm active in some of the public transit advocacy. And I was, again, commenting on North Berkeley because I have some friends who recently bought a house there, and they kind of got caught up in some of the concerns about the development near there. And I think you kind of addressed most of what I was going to ask about. But I will offer the observation that like North Berkeley, Santa Cruz can tend to be very engaged with the citizenry. And I think a lot of people get caught up almost in accidental NIMBYism. They get riled up about something, or other people get riled up about some other little thing, and collectively it can come off as NIMBYism. And that's only an observation. I don't have a suggestion or question about that.
I do.
Presentation, super interesting.
Thank you. I do have a response to that. That's really interesting, the accidental NIMBYism, because I've definitely seen that, but not talked about it in that way. Something I found with the people who sort of kind of get wrapped up, they have one specific issue, but then because they're concerned about that specific issue, they just oppose the whole thing. I found, and it's been really difficult the past couple of years, but the one-on-one conversations are tremendously helpful with people like that. I mean, there are going to be some people who oppose all development all the time. I don't know. You can have conversations, but I'm not sure how much you can shift them. But, especially in El Cerrito, the biggest opposition to developing at the BART station, there's been very few people who care about a tall building, because there's lots of tall buildings going up in El Cerrito. So only maybe a few residents who live right across the street. But the biggest concern has been around parking, because a lot of people drive to the station. El Cerrito is a very hilly area, which I know some of the Santa Cruz areas too. I mean, very steep hills. Like, if I lived at the top of those hills, I also wouldn't walk and bike to BART. So I get it, even though I'm, very committed to that. But it's having these individual conversations. And for the past 2 years, we've just had these Zoom meetings, but just a couple months ago, we finally did an in-person meeting again at the BART station. And I got to have a lot of one-on-one conversations with people, and our staff and consultants did too. And when you could talk to them for more than 30 seconds, you could help them figure out, like, maybe this won't be so bad. Here are your other options. There's this other BART station nearby that actually has excess parking capacity. Oh, did you know about this bus line? Oh, this is an option for you. But you have to, I think for some of these people, or they're worried about a specific shed, or they're worried about some very specific thing, you have to be willing to engage. So whether that's you or your electeds, I think it is important to have open communications, even if you don't agree on everything, because it's challenging to get people to feel okay about big change if they're not feeling like their concerns are being met.
Absolutely. All right, thank you. Lonnie, over to you, please. And if you'd like, go ahead and start with a brief introduction. Oh, Lonnie, you're muted.
Thanks. I introduced myself earlier, Lonnie Faulkner from Equity Transit. Rebecca, thank you so much for the presentation. It's pretty exciting to see the projects that you've put together. I think what really excites me too about your projects is that you're shooting for a minimum of 35% in that affordability, and also including something that we often don't target, which is that moderate middle. I say you're in between the rock and the hard place. Not low enough income to qualify for any of those affordable projects, but not enough income to afford to actually live here. So one of the things I've seen locally is that there's been this sort of fight for some groups to minimize that affordability component, and others who in some ways seem to be ostracized and seen as anti-development because they're pushing for higher levels. And I think what would be really helpful if we had some great tools on how we can get people to move in that direction of the 35 to 50% realm without getting them tagged as anti-building or anti-development for our community, because we need both, right? Also want to speak to this keeping the public fully informed. So just kind of want to hear, I think you addressed that moments ago, but one of the things I tend to see is that people will sometimes, groups will try to sneak in language or things that move things in one direction or the other that they want. And how has BART been in terms of like ensuring? It seems like you've really been transparent, like working to be really transparent with all sides. So you might want to appreciate if you speak to that as well. And also just having an overarching approved plan as a community ahead of time so that developments aren't just popped one and the other, and so that you have this fight every time there's a new development proposed. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those questions. I think on affordable, BART can do more because it's public land. We don't have to, but we want to, and we're able to do that. And so I think the dynamics are more challenging when it's not public land about what can be required, especially with how expensive it is to build housing right now. We need to change that eventually, but with how expensive it is, it's hard because if it's, private land and the land costs are astronomical, the building costs are astronomical, and you've already purchased the land and you have to start paying back your investors, you need to get it built quickly. And so it's challenging. So we have different dynamics at BART, and that makes it easier for us to have higher levels of affordability. We can discount the land. We also can have it built in phases, and we can have the leases set up in a way where the developers are only paying us as the buildings actually get built, or pay us very little at the beginning, but we can set it up in that way. You're not going to get that with a private landowner. So I think with public land, we really need to maximize the affordable housing because it's different dynamics. So I don't know that I have an answer for you for the kind of larger development conversation, but I think that needs to be key. Public land needs to have substantial affordable housing because that's our best opportunity. In terms of kind of being transparent and engaging the community, that's really important to BART. And since we work with the cities, it's always through BART, through the cities. And then when we have a developer on board, like we do now in El Cerrito, it's led by the developer with engagement from the city and BART as well. And so we have lots of community meetings. We also, in the past several years, have shifted to having a lot of online input points. So I didn't talk about this, but for the two Berkeley projects and El Cerrito, it's all on one line. So it's Ashby and then downtown Berkeley, which we don't own land there, and then North Berkeley and then El Cerrito. But since we're developing at 3 of the 4 stations within a few years of each other, we did a big access study and plan because we realized we're going to be taking away hundreds, maybe it's going to add up to thousands of parking spaces, and we needed to figure out how to get people to these stations on the same line. So we did a big public process around that, both in meetings, but also in online surveys to get really granular about how people were getting to BART, how they would get to BART. So we're doing a lot of types of engagement. We still don't get to everyone. Still like we just did this community meeting at El Cerrito Plaza, and there were still people who were like, I didn't know this was happening. And we've been talking about it for 3 years and having lots of meetings. So it's challenging to get to everybody no matter what you do, but we just try to use kind of as many channels as we can, meet people online, in person, by email, by phone, every way we can. But yeah, it's always challenging to get to everybody.
Thank you. Next chronologically in the chat would be Virginia Wright. And I see Sean has his hand raised, and I see Susan was raising her hand as well. So let's go in that order, please. Virginia, over to you if you'd like. And if you'd like to start with a very brief intro, that would be helpful.
Hello. I work with some of the folks here from Santa Cruz, Lonnie and other people here in Santa Cruz on trains and getting transportation. Hi, David. And I'm just here to listen primarily, but I'm curious if there is an effort in Santa Cruz that's a countywide effort to bring people together to sort of vision this transit and housing together. There's a lot of efforts around transit and a lot of efforts around housing. And I just don't know of a local group that's working together on that vision. So that's just a question.
Yeah, and I am Rebecca. I mean, if you happen to know, that's welcome. I actually don't know. Someone else on the call happen to know? Maybe there isn't one. Maybe we need to start one.
You can do it.
I mean, I think that's a pretty big goal of Santa Cruz YIMBY, is to enable people to not have to own a car to be close to high quality transit. But as we all know, transit in Santa Cruz could use improvement, we'll say. But there are a lot of people in our organization that are very passionate about, but including myself, we're very passionate about improving public transit in the area, and then incorporating that with high quality housing as well.
Yeah, great, thanks. Okay, so next to Sean, after Sean, Susan, after Susan, Megan, please. And Sean, if you want to reintroduce yourself very briefly, that would be great.
Hello, my name is Sean Schrum, and I'm a disabilities advocate in Santa Cruz, California. I'm glad to see how much money has been invested in transportation in the Valley. And SU keeps us pretty well updated. It's it's fantastic. So glad to see that that's going to help you all connect your systems. Yeah, in spite of how good the talk always sounds, there's never enough accessible housing, ever. And the current data is 1 in 4 Americans identifies as having a disability. And the thing is that we're all going to join that community eventually if we're lucky enough to live that long. And accessibility isn't just about ramp, it's lighting, security. There's a lot of issues, and when that gets left up to some specialists, some company, you're essentially outsourcing that. Looking to the local organizations is key, and the Bay Area has no shortage of that. Word that a subject that doesn't come up a lot, and the word that people don't like to talk about, is fire. So as far as safety goes for evacuation, BART would be extremely important. And emergency response and support for people with disabilities is also always lacking. So keeping that in mind, look to your neighbors. They're your friends, and they'll be glad to show up and give you their opinion and tell you what their needs are. And like everybody else here, we'll work for free, and do the research for you. One other thing I'd like to see is that underrepresented groups of people, including many who've been displaced by transportation projects, it would be good to see their contributions. Maybe that is in the form of artwork, landscaping, really anything. In Santa Cruz, it's Italian and Chinese and Japanese. In Watsonville, it's Filipino and Japanese. Yeah, we like to see ourselves, in faces and in art and food, and we don't always get to. In fact, culture tends to get erased. So, putting in some artwork, asking the local organizations what they would like to see is usually incredibly beneficial. Again, we'll work for free. Thanks.
Thank you. Would love to talk extensively about this, but I can tell you we are doing a lot with disability advocates, especially in Berkeley. This has been a really important issue that has come up in the conversations with the community and with planning. We don't have projects there yet. We have, ideas, but one of the things that has come up in our memorandum of agreement with the city is that we want to make the units fully accessible, that we want to work with the community to figure that out. I've been working very closely with the Center for Independent Living, which is located right at the Ashby BART station, right on top of it. And so they're very interested, especially in the units at Ashby BART. So we're doing a lot of work on that front, and we'll continue to. And I could do a whole nother talk about BART's art program, which I think is fantastic. But we're doing a lot of what you're talking about. And I think we're doing better with the displacement part than just providing art. In Berkeley, part of the agreement is that we want to prioritize getting people into these units who have been displaced. So those actual individuals. Now, if you're talking about people from generations ago, obviously we can't do that. But some of the displacement in Berkeley, especially around Ashby BART, has been quite recent in the past decade or two. So we're going to try to get some of those people housed again in Berkeley in our units.
Thank you. Great. I think my take on that is broadening our community beyond the immediate sense of our immediate circle and making sure that those people, that broad spectrum of community is included. And I love that, what Sean is saying about ask your neighbors, and that starts with meeting your neighbors and getting to know your neighbors and working with them. So wonderful. Thanks. Susan, over to you. And again, if you wouldn't mind briefly introducing yourself again, and if you would unmute.
You're muted, Susan.
Sorry. I'm Susan Stewart. I live here in Santa Cruz. I actually live up on campus in staff and faculty housing, and am a retired public health planner. And anyway, I just want to say it's really great to see all the progress that BART has been doing with housing. One of the things I'm going to say about reaching out to groups that haven't always been included is I worked on a general plan health element. We created one for Santa Clara County. And those meetings, we'd have these public meetings. We just posted that we're having them. And of course, we got lousy attendance from the kind of people that really are affected so much by these public health issues. And so we started, specifically meeting with certain organizations. I'm sure BART does that now, but that's the kind of thing I think for folks working on planning in Santa Cruz, specifically targeting groups that have an interest in this, as opposed to just doing it. And I don't know how often the planners here in Santa Cruz do that, but I think that's a really good thing to do. One of the things is I also was part of the visioning for, bringing BART into San Jose, worked on that for a couple of years before we had that sales tax. And one of the things that's frustrating for me, having somebody who rode I rode the express bus to San Jose from here, and then linked up to transit over there and all that. I wish Santa Cruz, there was more, people don't even know the express bus exists, and they don't know about the partnership with VTA. And one of the things I wish is that BART, I don't know if BART is thinking about Santa Cruz in terms of connection. I know we're part of the RTC, not the MTC and all that stuff, but many people from Santa Cruz commute over that hill every day. And some percentage, like myself, took the express bus and connect on transit. And so one thing I was thinking, even in terms of the YIMBY meetings, when you have meetings in person, it's good to put in the notice, and this is how you get to the meeting on transit. You know, we started doing that in our public health meetings and Santa Cruz or in Santa Clara County. So that's another thing. So I have just a lot of thoughts on this. And also the other thing is putting transit and housing together all the time in discussions. I just think it's really important because they are so linked. And then the final just little nitpicky thing, but I noticed I put in the chat, palm trees are terrible for walkability because they don't provide any shade. So BART continues to plan these things. Don't put in palm trees. There's a whole, this guy who wrote a book on walkability. He does a whole thing on, I think he even has a whole chapter on palm trees and why they're bad. That's just a small thing.
I agree. It was an early development, and we have whole books about what trees are allowed at BART stations moving forward, and we make much better decisions today. We also don't put any more ivy in, which is at so many BART stations that they put in 50 years ago, and we're stuck with, but we're slowly removing. In terms of like BART coming to Santa Cruz, that's not going to happen. But
no, I know.
Part of the going to San Jose is how many more connections we're going to be able to have with the region. So I think once we get into downtown San Jose, it's going to make a huge difference, not just for Santa Cruz, but everybody connecting. And hopefully at that point, I think at that point we'd work with agencies like in Santa Cruz about connecting up those bus lines. So we have shared meet times. We're doing that a lot more with various transit agencies, is making sure you don't get off the train and then your bus is just left and you're waiting a half hour, an hour. So there'll be work to do that once we get there.
That's great. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're effectively at time. I'm happy for us to do at least Megan's question if Rebecca, you're willing to stay another couple of minutes, but no problem if we need to end on time.
Yeah, I'm happy to stay 5 or 10 more minutes. So
okay, great.
I'm happy to take the questions left. Maybe people can keep them brief so we can get them all in.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so Megan, brief intro if you'd like, and concise question topic.
So yeah, I'm Megan Arnold. I relocated to Santa Cruz during the pandemic from San Francisco, where I was previously the president for the Walk San Francisco board. And then in another life, I worked in communications for the Milwaukee County Transit System. So definitely this is transit and ped advocacy is my jam, but dipping into the housing stuff now because it's all related. And so I wanted to go back to that earlier question about transit-oriented development in Santa Cruz and just thinking, like this is the right time that we're actually starting to really maybe plan for the light rail. And I just think that I think that everyone on this call and our groups that we're affiliated with just need to be very diligent about having those conversations as we develop. And so Rebecca, for you, I guess, any tips on like, as you've expanded into San Jose, like how have you started getting the communities there thinking about these sort of projects? Because it's like BART is new to San Jose. So just like, as you enter new communities as BART, is there any learnings that you could share?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of with San Jose, they were already on top of this in planning the building of the stations and building housing and jobs around the station. So it's maybe unique, but in other places where we built extensions, it's maybe less so. So our other recent extension was out further into Pittsburgh and in Antioch and East Contra Costa County, very suburban areas. But they are interested in doing housing development there, but the conversation's just slower, and also the market is slower there. So we haven't prioritized it because we need to wait till the market is there to do a development, at the scale we want to. But it's certainly we're not going to have that many more extensions coming on board. So it's less about going into new communities. It's more about starting new conversations with communities that we already serve. So doing a lot more of that. And that's being facilitated by the change in the regional housing needs assessment, like those requirements, the RHNA numbers. We all of a sudden have cities who a couple of years ago were like, don't prioritize us to do development because we don't want it here. Now saying, oh, we need to be in your 5-year work plan because we realize we actually can't meet our RHNA numbers without BART development. So things are shifting even without us, affirmatively taking on. We've been kind of going with the cities as they've been ready, but I think cities are getting ready much more quickly because of other requirements from the state.
Great, thank you. The next person I see in line is Lonnie. Lonnie, you're muted.
Hi, Rebecca, Lonnie Faulkner again. Appreciated looking at your before and after shots and seeing, more open space, more walkability, more bikes. One of the things, and this is more of a seed and kind of a question, as we continue to develop more density, personally, I think it's really important to prioritize community spaces to improve and promote connection between neighbors and prevent isolation. Some things that I think also are important in terms of developing our community's sense of connection with the earth would be things like community gardens, community gathering spaces, play spaces. You might even have little theatrical and art spaces. It seems like you're kind of heading in the direction for some of the things that I saw. I know that retail buildings are served through your BART developments, which is essential. I know there's a lot of commerce and economics around that, but also not having all the focus on the commerce, but also on this community gathering. If you can address that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, what we've been doing is these aren't cookie cutter developments. So each community, we go in asking them what they want. So in these community meetings, in talking with the city councils and the other appointed bodies, and they each tell us different things. So in San Leandro, I mentioned before, they really wanted to have a childcare center there. And so that was part of the development. There's also a really big playground at the center of the development for people who live there. And then at Lake Merritt BART, it's right in the heart of Chinatown, and something that's been a really big problem is rent for nonprofits. It's been a really big problem in Oakland and San Francisco and surrounding areas. And so some of their key nonprofits wanted to have discounted space for nonprofits. So not just discounted housing, affordable housing, but affordable rent for nonprofits. And so that's something we did in Lake Merritt that nowhere else has asked for. They really wanted that. So each place is kind of asking for different things. Some want retail, some don't. Like, we're still not sure how much retail there'll be at North Berkeley. If there is, it'll probably be limited to one stretch because that wasn't such a big thing people wanted. They wanted more open space. So we're kind of going based on what communities want and need. We don't want to just build a bunch of retail and then have it not be the thing people need. It's not going to succeed if it's not what people need and want. So we're really working individually with each community.
Great, thank you. I do want to wrap it up soon, in part because I need to get back to work. But Sean, I see your hand raised.
To further your progress, it's important to look to what your neighbors, what their challenges are. Santa Cruz is not that far away. Silicon Valley goes all the way up into Felton and as far up the coast as Watsonville. Anybody who's tried to rent an apartment or a house in the last 10 years has found that that's who has the money and can pay. For years, we've in Santa Cruz, we've been in danger of losing access to our rail. And if it weren't for the CZU fire directors and fire chiefs, few people would even know about it. And I'm telling you, few people in the valley seem to know. And as Santa Cruz, Santa Cruz wildlands go, so goes the rest of California. We had a 3,000-mile long smoke cloud that we're choking on in New York. and the firefighters want the rail in place so that they can tank in water if and when needed. So again, emergency services, what's good for them, is good for you and your networks. So yeah, Santa Cruz is not that far away when that's where your workers, your employees, your managers and business owners, that's where they live. Everybody up there owns stock in those companies too. So so it's important to we're still your neighbors. Thanks.
Yeah, and to the point about the fire precautions, I remember after the '89 earthquake, BART was the way to get across the bay for quite a while, which was a fond childhood memory for me, as is taking BART to El Cerrito and going to my favorite aquarium there, and also in the '80s, and more in the 2000s, taking my my older children along the rail and trail, and admiring the wonderful time-lapse mural along the elevated BART tracks in Berkeley, and just a lot of wonderful experiences, including going to a community garden next to the BART tracks and the rail trail there. A lot of high quality life that is also resilient to the things that come along, is made more possible by high quality transit and integrated transit with other elements of our life, including housing. So yeah, thank you. If anyone has any burning last points, we can do like one more, but then we should probably wrap it up. Rebecca, any particular points of advice for those of us in Santa Cruz who'd like to keep this progress of getting light rail to be a reality?
Oof, my advice would be you're in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
One of the first transit projects that I advocated on was for bus rapid transit. And I think I started advocating on that in like 2008, and it just got built a couple of years ago here in the East Bay. So it's super important. Please do it, and know it's gonna take some time and energy, and you're gonna have to engage on things you might not have even considered, like not just convincing the decision makers it's a good idea, but then helping support any funding measures, and then helping against any opposition. And it's gonna be a long-term thing, but then you'll have it for decades to come, and for your children and your children's children. So it will be worth it.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Rebecca. We really deeply appreciate your time and your effort, not just, of course, in this presentation, but in your BART service and your public work in general. Very grateful. And thank you, everyone who joined and participated. I was expecting to have to kick out a jerk or two, and it was great. We had really high quality participation, and that's wonderful. Thanks to you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for
By the way,
setting
you
this up.
guys have an absolutely great TikTok channel.
I'll let the folks who run it know.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Ending the meeting now. All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.